The Beast of Blackwater Ridge. I've always prided myself on being the guy who keeps his cool no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip deep into the Blackwater Ridge, Manala National Forest. It was supposed to be a challenge, and I was ready for it. I'd hiked dozens of trails tougher than this, and I wanted to prove that to my old friends, especially Nate, who couldn't even set up a tent without breaking a sweat. But there's something about being miles away from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless trees, that starts to mess with your head. As soon as we arrived, I could feel it. Not that I'd let anyone see that, of course. "Kara, you got the map?" I called out as we packed up the last of the gear. "Yep, but I doubt we'll need it with you in charge," she winked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned. She knew how to stroke my ego, one of the things I loved about her. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling to adjust the straps of his pack. His face was already red, and we hadn't even started walking yet. "Can we take it slow, guys? I haven't done this in a while." "Sure, Nate, we'll pace ourselves," I said, trying to hide my impatience. Sarah, ever the practical one, rolled her eyes but said nothing. She was the scientist of the group. The one who'd be lecturing us about rare plants and ecosystems halfway up the trail. She was here more for research than the hike, but I knew she could handle herself. We hit the trailhead late in the morning, the sun already filtering through the thick canopy above. The first couple of miles were easy enough, well marked, a few uphill climbs, nothing too rough. Nate fell behind pretty quickly, as expected, but we made enough stops to let him catch up. By the time we reached our first campsite, the air had a heavy, oppressive feel. The sun dipped below the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The dense foliage seemed to swallow up the light, leaving us in a strange twilight. We set up camp without much trouble, although Nate complained about the weight of his gear the whole time. Our tents were cheap, sure, but they did the job. Sarah was meticulous, making sure her tent was perfectly aligned with the slope of the ground. "It's going to rain tomorrow," she said almost as an afterthought. "Clear skies right now," I pointed out, but she just shrugged. Night came quickly, faster than I expected. By the time we had the fire going, the forest had gone almost completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. "Hear what?" Kara asked, stirring the pot of stew she'd made over the fire. "No, it's like, I don't know, like something moving out there." I paused, listening. At first, there was nothing, but then I heard it too, soft, distant, and low. A growl, almost like the sound of a heavy breath. "Coyotes," I said, trying to sound confident. "Nothing to worry about. They're probably more scared of us than we are of them." But I saw Sarah tense up. She was studying the woods beyond the firelight, her face set in concentration. I didn't like that. When I turned back to Nate, he was pale, fidgeting with his hands. "Maybe we should keep the fire going all night," he said. "Relax, Nate. We're fine. Nothing's coming near us." But the truth was, something felt off. Even I couldn't shake it. The second day was rough. The terrain started to get steeper, and the trail was less defined. Nate was falling behind more often, and Kara's enthusiasm was starting to wane. We pressed on, but there was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. Halfway through the day, we found something that made me stop in my tracks. A deer carcass, ripped apart and strewn across the trail. Blood, dark and congealed, soaked into the ground around it. Whatever had killed it wasn't hunting for food. It looked like something had torn it apart just for the hell of it. Nate gagged, turning away. "What the hell?" Kara knelt beside the body, her face a mix of curiosity and horror. This wasn't a bear. Look at the size of these tracks. I crouched down next to her. She was right. The prints were huge, human-like but twisted. Something was wrong with the feet. Long, deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her brow furrowed in deep concern. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "We should go back." The confident TJ, who could handle anything, suddenly felt a sliver of doubt crawl up his spine. "Nah, we're fine," I said, brushing it off. "It's just some animal. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving." But I knew, we all knew, something was out there watching. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier, just as the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent, something foul. The air felt heavy, thick with unexplainable dread. The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows on the tents, but none of us felt the comfort of its warmth. We sat closer than usual, even Nate, who had barely spoken since we found the deer. I sat there, gripping the handle of my knife, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid, but when I looked at the faces of my friends, I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. "Do you hear that?" Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. We all went silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind in the trees. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, closer this time. "What the hell is that?" Nate's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. "It's just an animal," I said again, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore. But it wasn't. We all knew that. This was something different, something wrong. From the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved. It was fast, so fast I barely caught a glimpse. But I saw enough, a tall, hunched figure just beyond the ring of light watching us. Its eyes glowed bright and unnatural. Kara stood up. "I'm going to check it out." "No," Sarah hissed, grabbing her arm. "Stay here. Don't be stupid." But Kara, always fearless, shook her off and stepped into the darkness. "Kara," I shouted, grabbing my flashlight. I scanned the darkness. Then I saw it. A tall, gaunt creature with dark, leathery skin and glowing red eyes. It lunged. Kara screamed. We ran, and we never saw her again. Before we start the story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. When we first arrived at Shenandoah National Park, I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. The towering trees, the vast open skies, and the faint sound of birds singing in the distance. This was exactly the kind of break we all needed. I'm Alex, the planner of the group, and I'd organized this camping trip to escape the stress of city life. Mark, my boyfriend, sat in the passenger seat beside me, relaxed and smiling as we made our way along the winding mountain road. Behind us in the RV were Jessica and Eric, my two closest friends. They weren't exactly the outdoorsy type, but they'd agreed to come along, maybe out of some sense of duty to reconnect. Eric was already cracking jokes about how bad he'd be at camping, while Jessica half laughed nervously, fiddling with her phone. I remember feeling so confident, so prepared. I'd planned everything, except, of course, for the things no one could plan for. We parked the RV at a small secluded site off the Appalachian Trail, far from the more populated areas. That was the whole point. Isolation, serenity, nature at its purest. The weather was supposed to be clear all weekend, perfect for hiking and camping. As we started setting up camp, the first signs of trouble were small. Jessica complained about her shoes. "These hiking boots are killing me. Why did I even buy them?" She groaned. "They're probably just stiff," I said, brushing her off. I was already focused on getting the tent up, but that's when I noticed Mark shaking his head. "The tent's missing poles," he said, laughing a little. "We'll have to use the RV for tonight." "Fine," I replied, hiding my frustration. "Minor setbacks, nothing more." The real trouble began as dusk fell. It was subtle at first. As we sat around the small campfire Mark had built, the woods around us seemed to grow quieter. The bird song, once a pleasant background, faded into nothing. No wind stirred the leaves, and even the occasional sound of wildlife disappeared. I chalked it up to the natural rhythms of the forest, nocturnal creatures and all that. But then I noticed the smell. At first it was faint, a whiff of something rotten, like spoiled meat. I thought maybe it was something in the air, or that something had died nearby. I didn't mention it, not wanting to freak anyone out. Eric, of course, was oblivious to the shift in mood. He was still joking around, telling some story about a horror movie he'd seen last week. "This place reminds me of one of those settings," he said, grinning as he poked at the fire. A group of friends in the middle of nowhere, and then bam, haunted by some spirit or creature. "Shut up," Jessica muttered, hugging her knees. "This place is creepy enough already." I rolled my eyes at them both, but Mark shifted uneasily beside me, glancing out into the darkening woods. I was about to ask him what was wrong when he stood up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I said, feeling a flicker of irritation. We'd barely been here a few hours, and they were already on edge. "I swear I heard something," he said, his voice tense. "Like footsteps, heavy, coming from the woods. Eric laughed, but it was strained. It's probably a bear or something, or maybe Bigfoot. Jessica looked pale, her eyes darting to the dark forest around us. This isn't funny, guys. It's nothing, I said firmly. Just the woods settling down for the night. Let's not spook ourselves over nothing. But as the evening wore on, that smell of rot kept coming back, and so did the uneasy silence. Even the crackle of the fire felt muted. The next day was supposed to be better. We set out on the trail, hoping to shake off the weirdness of the night before. The weather was colder than expected, with a thick mist hanging low in the valley, making everything damp. Jessica slipped a few times on the muddy path, cursing under her breath. "This fog is so creepy," she muttered. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "It'll clear up once the sun's out. Let's just enjoy the hike." But I could tell he was uneasy too. None of us had slept well. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard something moving outside the RV. Maybe it was my imagination, but something kept waking me up, like a low rustling or breathing. Halfway through the hike, we reached a lookout point. The fog had lifted just enough for us to see the rolling hills stretching out below. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Then I saw Mark, standing at the edge of the trees, staring into the distance. "Mark?" I called. He didn't answer. I walked over to him, a knot forming in my stomach. "What's wrong?" He pointed, his face pale. "Do you see that?" I squinted, looking where he was pointing. At first, I saw nothing but trees, but then something moved, a figure, tall and gaunt, barely visible through the mist. It stood completely still, as though it had been there the entire time, watching. "It's just a hiker," I said, though my voice sounded less confident than I had hoped. "That's no hiker," Mark whispered. "Look at it." The figure stood too tall, its limbs too thin, and its skin seemed pale, almost translucent, but before I could get a better look, it was gone, melted into the fog. By the time we got back to the RV, the mood had soured. Mark was withdrawn, barely speaking, and Jessica kept glancing over her shoulder as though she expected something to jump out at us. The smell returned as we gathered around the campfire again that night. This time it was stronger, more pungent, like decaying meat left out in the sun. Eric wrinkled his nose. "Okay, seriously, what is that?" "It's the woods," I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. The silence pressed down on us like a weight, and then from deep in the trees we heard it. A voice, soft, distant, but unmistakably human. "Help me." We all froze. "What the hell?" Eric whispered, his eyes wide. The voice came again, a little closer. "Help, help me." "It's someone in trouble," Mark said, standing up. "We need to go check." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't. That doesn't sound right." The voice was too calm, too controlled. There was no panic in it, no urgency. It sounded wrong, like it was echoing in the wrong direction. Jessica was shaking now, her face pale. "We have to leave. I don't like this." For once, Eric wasn't joking. "Yeah, maybe we should call it quits." But Mark was already moving toward the trees. "Mark, stop!" I hissed, following him. "This is crazy." He didn't stop. He kept walking toward the voice, his expression blank, as if he were in a trance. I reached out, grabbing him and pulling him back, just as a figure emerged from the fog. The same gaunt figure we'd seen earlier. It stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its eyes hollow black pits. My blood turned to ice. "What is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. The figure took a step forward, its body moving in a jerky, unnatural way, like it didn't know how to walk properly. Then, with a sickening crack, it twisted its head to the side, staring at us with those empty, soulless eyes. Mark stumbled back, snapping out of whatever trance had held him. We need to go. Now." The four of us rushed to the RV, slamming the door shut behind us. Outside, the figure circled the clearing, watching us, waiting. The next few hours were a blur of panic. We tried to start the RV, but the engine sputtered and died. The flashlight batteries drained within minutes. Every time we looked outside, the figure was there, standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. "We're trapped," Eric muttered, pacing the small space of the RV. "What the hell is that thing?" "It's not real," I said, though even I wasn't sure anymore. "It can't be." But it was, and it wasn't going anywhere. Mark sat in the corner, his head in his hands. "It's the Wendigo," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What?" I asked, staring at him. The Wendigo, he repeated. It's an old Native American legend, a spirit of insatiable hunger. It drives people mad, makes them turn on each other. That's ridiculous, said, but my voice shook. I've heard of it, Eric said, his face pale. It feeds on fear and hunger. A cold realization washed over me. The constant hunger we'd all been feeling, the strange cravings, the paranoia. Everything had started the moment we'd arrived. It's trying to drive us mad, Mark said, his eyes wild. That's why it hasn't attacked. It wants us to destroy each other. By the time night fell, the Wendigo was closer, standing just outside the RV, its gaunt, twisted face pressed against the window, its fingers tapping softly on the glass. Jessica couldn't take it anymore. I have to get out of here, she screamed, bolting for the door. Wait, I shouted, but it was too late. She was already outside, running into the woods. We rushed after her, but the fog swallowed her whole. I could hear her screaming, her voice echoing through the trees. And then, silence. We found her body a few minutes later. Her limbs were twisted, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The Wendigo stood over her, watching, its empty eyes locked on us. We need to leave, Mark said, his voice shaking now. We stumbled back to the RV, but as we slammed the door shut, I saw the look in Mark's eyes. The hunger had taken hold of him. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting toward me, then Eric. He's not right, Eric whispered. It's inside him. Mark lunged at me, his hands grasping at my throat. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I can't stop it. I struggled, pushing him off, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Eric grabbed a metal pipe and stood over him, ready to strike if he tried again. We have to get out of here, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Wendigo was still outside, waiting. As we approached, the fog began to lift. We packed what little we could carry and made a run for it, leaving the RV behind. The Wendigo didn't follow. It just watched, its hollow eyes locked onto us as we disappeared down the trail. Even now, I can still feel its gaze, like it's always there, just beyond the edge of my vision. Watching, waiting. I'll never go back to the wilderness again. Not after what I've seen. Not after what we've done. The forest was supposed to be my escape. I drove the RV deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains, hoping solitude would offer some kind of peace. I had been out here a few times before, never this deep though, but it had always been calming. Nature had a way of quieting the noise in my head. After I left the job, the silence became my companion, even though it haunted me with memories I wasn't ready to face, the accident that had ended my career as a paramedic. Every night it replayed in my mind, always the same horrific details. But with each viewing, I saw a new way I could have saved the child. A different decision, a split second sooner, and maybe it didn't matter. I was here now. Alone. The sound of gravel crunching under my tires as I parked off an old dirt road was oddly satisfying. I turned off the engine, and for a moment, there was bliss. No noise except for the rustle of trees in the wind. This was what I needed. No sirens, no screaming, just the mountains. I grabbed my bag and climbed out, stretching my legs before heading over to the old fire lookout tower nearby. It was a relic, long abandoned and forgotten by most hikers. The wood was graying, peeling from years of exposure, but it stood firm, a silent sentinel watching over the rolling hills. Something about the place had always intrigued me. It had a gravity to it, like it was holding secrets only those who ventured close enough could uncover. I planned to spend the weekend here, at least 3 days before I had to go back to reality. I didn't need much, just the stillness, the mountains, a break from the memories. I set up camp near the RV, built a small fire, and tried to let go. But the quiet was different this time. The first night, it started with whispers. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames flicker against the trees, when I thought I heard voices, not nearby, but carried on the wind. Faint, like a conversation just out of reach. I strained to listen, but they faded, lost in the rustle of the leaves. Probably just my mind playing tricks on me, I told myself. I hadn't slept well in weeks, and the quiet, while peaceful, was unnerving in its own way. After a while, I retreated to the RV, exhausted, but the voices lingered in the back of my mind, soft murmurs that tugged at my thoughts. As I lay down, I told myself it was nothing, just echoes of people who had camped here long before. The wind could carry sounds in strange ways out here. But the deeper I fell into sleep, the louder they grew until I jerked awake, covered in sweat. There were no voices, just the oppressive weight of silence. I stared at the ceiling, the same question running through my mind. Was this peace or something else? The next morning, things started to get strange. I woke to find my watch blinking, frozen at 2:47 a.m. I tapped the screen a few times, but it refused to budge. Strange. When I checked my phone, it was dead, despite being fully charged the night before. I chalked it up to bad luck, but when I stepped out of the RV, the sun seemed higher in the sky than it should have been. It was late morning, but it felt like I had only just fallen asleep. I spent the day hiking, trying to keep my mind occupied. The trail was familiar. I'd hiked this ridge before. But something about it felt different. Landmarks I swore I'd seen on the way up seemed out of place, or worse, missing. And every time I thought I was making progress, I'd find myself right back where I started. The same twisted tree, the same rock formation, a loop. The disorientation didn't set in all at once. It was a slow, creeping unease that settled into my bones. The wind felt wrong too, as if it was carrying something. I couldn't quite hear those whispers again, faint, distorted, carried on the breeze. This time they were closer. By nightfall, the voices were louder. They weren't whispers anymore, but full conversations, disembodied words spoken in tones I couldn't place. It was like someone was just out of view, talking, laughing. At first I stayed by the fire, trying to block it out, but the longer I sat there, the clearer the voices became. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was as if they were replaying over and over fragments of words lost on the wind. I stood up, scanning the tree line. Shadows flickered just beyond the light of the fire. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking in the stillness. No answer. The hairs on my neck stood up as I watched the shadows shift, a figure. It moved between the trees, far enough that I couldn't see clearly, but close enough to make my pulse quicken. My first thought was that it was another hiker, maybe someone lost. But when I took a step toward it, it vanished, gone, as if it had never been there. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it into the woods, but the beam of light revealed nothing but trees. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks again, but my gut told me otherwise. There was something here, something I didn't understand. I retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me, but even inside, the silence was heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The voices were still there, faint now, but constant. It felt like someone was standing just outside the RV, talking in circles over and over. The next morning, I hiked to the old fire lookout. I don't know why. Something about the tower drew me in, like I needed to be there. It was old, dilapidated, and crumbling, but it held a strange power. When I reached the top, I could see for miles. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched out in every direction, green and endless. I expected to feel some sense of peace, but instead, a deep dread settled in my chest. The lookout wasn't empty. It was filled with the remnants of people who had come here before me. Old camping gear, torn sleeping bags, cans of food long since expired, graffiti scratched into the wooden beams, names etched into the walls. And something else. Carved into the center of the floor was a symbol, a crude spiral, looping in on itself. I knelt down, running my fingers over the grooves. It looked old, weathered, like it had been there forever. The voices returned, louder this time, clearer. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the tower was empty, just the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. I ran my hands through my hair, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong here. The ridge, the lookout. It wasn't just an old campsite. It was a trap, a loop, and I was stuck in it. I tried to leave that afternoon, packed up the RV, started the engine, and drove down the winding road that had brought me here. But no matter how far I drove, the landscape didn't change. The trees, the rocks, it all blurred together, the same stretches of road repeating over and over. After what felt like hours, I found myself back at the campsite, the fire now cold and dead, sitting in the exact same spot. My heart sank. I tried again. This time, I took a different route. But once again, the RV looped back to the same spot. It was as if the mountain wouldn't let me leave. By nightfall, I knew the truth. The whispers weren't random. They weren't in my head. They were echoes, echoes of the past, of people who had been here before me, people who had tried to leave and failed. I sat in the RV, staring out the window at the darkening woods. The figures had returned. This time there were more of them. They moved between the trees, watching me, waiting. One by one, they stepped into the clearing, surrounding the RV. I could see them now, faded, distorted, like shadows of people long gone. Their faces were blank, their movements slow and deliberate. They said nothing, but I could hear them. Their voices, the same words, looping over and over. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This was it. I was stuck, trapped in their endless loop, just like they were. The door creaked open. I don't remember what happened next, only that I woke up the next morning sitting by the cold, dead fire. The RV door was wide open, the woods empty and still, but the whispers were gone. For now, I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't seem to work the same way anymore. Every time I think I'm getting closer to an answer, I find myself right back where I started. I'm not alone on this ridge. There are others. I can hear them sometimes, their voices echoing. The road into the Adirondack was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed. Complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp with the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the place where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I moved through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I gathered more firewood, I found more of them. Carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter and aiming the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing. Only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped. The trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I fixed the spelling, polished the flow, and subtly heightened the tension for a more immersive read. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased, like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondacks, it's different." I frowned. "Different how?" He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right, and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. I fixed minor spelling issues, improved flow. That evening back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time. And with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them. But when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse pounded, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits staring right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Its presence pressed down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. No response. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move, but it never did it. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied. Dozens of them, surrounding the campsite, the same tall, thin figures etched into the trees, like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the Adir, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods, still watching. And maybe it always would be. I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I thrived on it. After years of pushing myself, filming solo wilderness expeditions and gaining thousands of subscribers, isolation felt like a familiar friend. Devil's Ridge, though, this place was something else. I had scouted it out for weeks, planning my trip down to the smallest detail. The ridge was perfect, remote, rugged, untouched. Hardly any hikers came this far into the Montana wilderness, and the few who did warned of getting lost in the dense forests or disappearing into one of the old crumbling mining tunnels. The place was steeped in eerie local lore, and I loved it. Stories of shadowy figures, night stalkers they called them. Spirits of miners who had perished in a cave-in over 100 years ago. They supposedly wandered these woods, haunting anyone foolish enough to linger too long. It was exactly the kind of place I could milk for my survival blog. Spooky, remote, dripping with atmosphere. My audience would eat it up. I parked the RV in a small clearing nestled against a cliffside, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The towering pines cast long shadows across the forest floor, and the sound of the wind through the trees was strangely muted. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just the breeze and the soft creak of old branches swaying. Max, my drone, hovered above the trees, capturing stunning panoramic views. I had just set it to autopilot to get some shots of the surrounding cliffs when the feed cut out, static flooding my screen. "What the hell?" I muttered, tapping the screen in frustration. I brought the drone back. Its footage was corrupted. Strange, distorted images flickered in and out of focus. Warped figures, standing just at the edge of the tree line. I chalked it up to a malfunction. After all, I was miles from civilization, and the signal could have been weak. But still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the footage was wrong. Shrugging it off, I stored Max for the night and started a fire, settling in for what I hoped would be an uneventful evening. As I recorded my thoughts for the day, I decided to throw in a few words about the local legend. Something to spice up the narrative for my viewers. "They call them the Night Stalkers," I said into the camera, my face illuminated by the glow of the flames. Spirits of miners who died in these hills, lost to the darkness. But I'm not worried. Just a bunch of ghost stories, right? I grinned, more to convince myself than anyone else. The first real sign of trouble came, the second night. I was reviewing the footage I had shot earlier in the day when I heard a soft sound outside the RV. At first I thought it was the wind, just the trees shifting, but then it came again, low, rhythmic, like tapping. Max growled low in his corner, his eyes fixed on the door. I froze, listening. The tapping grew louder, almost insistent, like someone or something was circling the RV, knocking softly against the metal. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on and swinging the beam toward the door. "All right, whoever's out there, you're not scaring me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for something, anything. After a few long moments, I convinced myself it was just a branch or something scraping against the side of the RV. I've been on enough solo trips to know how easy it was to get jumpy out here, but Max was still growling, his ears flat against his head. He wasn't convinced. And if I'm honest, neither was I. The next day, I decided to do a bit more exploring. The cliffs were full of old mining tunnels, most of them sealed up decades ago. I found one near the base of the ridge, its entrance boarded up with rotting planks. Curiosity got the better of me. I pried a few loose and slipped through the narrow gap. The tunnel was dark and smelled of damp earth. My flashlight flickered as I moved deeper inside, casting eerie shadows against the jagged walls. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, crudely drawn, unfamiliar shapes that seemed to spiral in on themselves. I felt a sudden chill. A soft sound echoed through the tunnel, like footsteps on loose gravel. I froze, shining my light down the passage. Nothing. Still, something about the place felt wrong. I backed out quickly, breathing a sigh of relief as I stepped back into the daylight. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the tapping returned. Louder, more deliberate. I sat in the RV, clutching the flashlight in one hand, the other gripping my camera as I recorded the strange noises. The tapping moved around the RV, slow, methodical, almost as if it were circling me. I stood up, heart pounding, and yanked the door open, shining the light into the darkness. Nothing. I stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold air. The forest was still, but the air felt thick, heavy. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Shadows, tall and thin, flitting between the trees. They moved like people, but their forms were indistinct, more like silhouettes than solid shapes. My chest tightened. I swung the flashlight toward the figures, but as soon as the beam touched them, they vanished, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there, frozen. My heart hammered against my ribs. The wind picked up, carrying faint whispers, almost like voices calling from the woods. I backed toward the RV and slammed the door shut. The shadows grew bolder after that. No matter where I went, I could feel them watching me. Their dark forms flickered just at the edge of my vision. My drone footage showed eerie glimpses of them, dark, human-like shapes moving through the trees, always just out of focus. I tried to leave the ridge, packed up my gear, loaded Max into the RV, started the engine, nothing. The RV stalled. I tried again and again, nothing. It was as if the ridge itself didn't want me to leave. Panic set in. I wasn't one to lose my cool, but this was something I couldn't explain. I was trapped, and I wasn't alone. On the final night, everything came to a head. I lay in bed, the RV windows covered, trying to block out the tapping that had returned. Max was huddled in the corner, trembling. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to get in. I sat up, heart racing, and suddenly the RV shook violently, as if something had slammed into the side. I jumped to my feet, grabbing the flashlight. The beam flickered and died. The whispers outside grew louder, more urgent, of unintelligible voices filled my head. I rushed to the door, flinging it open, and was met with complete darkness. The fire outside had gone out. The shadows were everywhere now, circling the RV, their forms more defined than ever, dark, human-like. No faces, no features, just endless blackness. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were coming for me. I ran. My flashlight flickered back to life as I sprinted into the woods. The shadows followed, flitting between the trees, their whispers filling my ears, growing louder and louder. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the tapping, away from the whispers, away from the shadows. But the forest twisted around me, disorienting me. Soon, I was lost in a sea of towering pines and jagged rocks. And then I saw it. The entrance to the old mining tunnel, standing open like a gaping mouth. The shadows pressed in closer, their forms flickering at the edges of my vision. And I realized with a sinking feeling that I had nowhere else to go. I stumbled toward the tunnel, the air inside cold and stale. The shadows followed me in, their whispers echoing off the walls. I don't know what I expected to find in there. An escape, maybe. A way out. But as I ventured deeper into the darkness, I realized the truth. There was no escape. The Night Stalkers weren't just spirits. They were part of this place, tied to the land, the tunnels, the shadows. So was I. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me whole was the sound of tapping, soft, rhythmic, endless. Days later, when Ranger Hank found my RV, it was empty. My gear was scattered. My camera was still rolling, but I was gone. The footage showed brief glimpses of my final moments, me running into the forest, the shadows close behind, their forms flickering and twisting in the dark. The last frame caught my face, pale and terrified, standing at the entrance of the tunnel. A silhouette stood behind me, tall, thin, featureless. The Night Stalkers had found me, and I was never leaving Devil's Ridge. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels beneath heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, in the place I'd chosen to spend a week, just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. Solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it. The cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. Stepping out into the icy air, my breath fogged in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching into the distance where the trees blurred into the snowy horizon. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble. It seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration, like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze. But this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before. The routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were beginning to appear in the clear sky, bright and distant. And then I saw it, a light, faintly flickering, coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the surface in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved, slow, steady, as if something was drifting beneath the ice. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and rhythmic, like a lantern swaying beneath the surface. I stood, my heart pounding, and stepped toward the lake. The light pulsed, growing brighter, then dimming again, always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection from the sky. But deep down, I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing, the light, the sound. Something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I drilled the day before. Something was off. There by the edge of the hole was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. That crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in a crooked line, as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the fracture, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the freezing water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine. But there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again. Louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice head closer than before. My pulse quickened and a cold sweat broke out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? Stories I had heard over the years came flooding back. Stories about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire tales meant to scare the newcomers. But now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake. It looked abandoned, but there were fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing it open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice," I said, "and last night I saw a light moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake," he muttered. "Abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there." I swallowed hard. The fire crackled in the silence. "Ever since," the man continued, "strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't, and that light—" He looked up at me, his face grim. "It's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window, as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV. But as I started the engine, the ground beneath me began to tremble. The rumbling was deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. Then, in the distance, the surface exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark, enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it, the weight of something massive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped, but the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried, and whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet. The forest had never felt so thick, so claustrophobic. I had been on the road for weeks, traveling up and down the East Coast in my RV, looking for some peace. It was supposed to be a reset, a break from the grind after getting laid off from my tech job. I thought getting away from everything would give me a fresh perspective, but the road had only left me more exhausted. It was like I couldn't find what I was searching for. And I didn't even know what that was anymore. That's how I ended up in Ocala National Forest. It was early fall, and the place was practically deserted. The few tourists had already left, leaving the humid air and endless stretches of swamp and pine all to me. The ranger I passed when I pulled into the park didn't seem to think camping so close to Devil's Eye Spring was a good idea. "There's no one else out there this time of year," he said, leaning into my open window with a cautious smile. "People get lost in that part of the forest, especially near the spring. Strange place. People say it's cursed." Cursed? I didn't believe in any of that. I was here for quiet, not ghost stories. Still, his words stuck with me as I wound down the narrow trail in my RV, finally parking next to the spring. The water was still and black, perfectly round, like the eye of some sleeping giant, with tall cypress trees surrounding it like ancient sentinels. The spot was isolated, just as I wanted. After setting up camp, I sat by the water and tried to take it all in. The only sound was the occasional splash of something in the water. Fish, maybe, or a frog. The heat was oppressive, the kind of sticky warmth that clings to you and makes every movement sluggish. I hadn't realized how worn down I was from weeks of driving. But the moment I sat down, the weight of exhaustion hit me like a brick. It was a heavy kind of tired, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you want to sleep for days. So that's what I did. I crawled into the RV, lay down on the thin mattress, and passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The RV was stifling, even with the windows cracked, and my head pounded like I'd been hit with a hammer. I sat up, rubbing my temples, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest outside was completely silent. Not even the usual night sounds of crickets or frogs. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the thick humidity dampening the sound. But then, in the stillness, I heard it. A soft whisper. Faint. Distant. It was impossible to make out the words, but I knew it was there. My pulse quickened. Who else would be out here in the middle of nowhere? I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my boots, and stepped outside. The air was still, and the beam of my light barely cut through the haze hanging over the spring. Nothing. I circled the RV once, shining the light over the trees, half expecting to catch someone watching me from the darkness, but there was no one. Only the trees, looming like shadowy figures in the mist. The whisper came again, this time closer. My skin prickled, and I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound. As the beam caught the nearest tree, I froze. There, carved into the bark, was an intricate spiral. It was faint, but I could see the markings etched deep into the wood, swirling inward like some ancient symbol. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived, but now it was unmistakable. "What the hell?" I muttered, running my fingers over the grooves. The texture was rough, jagged, fresh. Whoever had carved it had done it recently. But why? A chill crept down my spine, the kind that sticks with you even in the thick Florida heat. I backed away from the tree and went inside the RV, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank, or some kind of tribal marking that had been there for years, but something still gnawed at the back of my mind. The whisper I'd heard wasn't a figment of my imagination. I was sure of it. When I stepped outside again, my eyes went straight to the tree. The spiral was still there, mocking me with its perfect precision. I walked a few paces around the campsite, scanning the other trees. That's when I saw it. More spirals. Dozens of them. Carved into trees, rocks, even the dirt near the edge of the spring. It was like they had multiplied overnight. I knelt by one of the carvings in the ground, my fingers trembling as I traced the lines. They were everywhere. My pulse quickened as I stood up, stepping back. I hadn't imagined them. They were real, and there were too many to ignore. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the ranger had mentioned something about Native American tribes that once lived in the area. These carvings could be remnants of some ancient ritual or custom. But the more I looked at them, the more unsettled I became. I grabbed my phone, hoping to research the symbols, but when I turned it on, the screen flickered and died. I checked the time on my watch. It blinked nonsensically. 12, frozen. No matter how many times I reset it, it wouldn't budge. Time was frozen, just like the forest around me. The air felt heavier as the hours passed, like something was pressing down on me. the whisper returned. No longer distant, but close. Too close. It followed me wherever I went, slipping in and out of the thick, humid air just out of reach. I could feel it in my bones. Something was watching me. That night, the dream started. I was lying in the RV, the air thick and suffocating, when I felt it. A presence standing over me. Its breath was hot against my skin. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. My limbs refused to cooperate. I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my skull. Then came the whisper, low, guttural. Words in a language I couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. I was marked. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, the sheets soaked in sweat. The RV was stifling again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see something staring back at me. The markings were spreading. They weren't just outside anymore. They were inside the RV, on the walls, on the floor, even on my skin. I tore off my shirt, running to the small mirror by the sink. There on my chest was a spiral, faint but unmistakable. My hands trembled as I traced the lines etched into my flesh. My mind raced. The curse, the ranger's warning. It was all real. The whispers were louder now, relentless. They filled my head, demanding my attention. I stumbled out of the RV, gasping for air, trying to escape the suffocation, the presence that had followed me. But no matter how far I ran, the whispers followed. I found myself standing at the edge of Devil's Eye Spring, my chest heaving. The whispers swirled around me. The markings on the trees seemed to glow in the moonlight, pulling me toward the water. My reflection in the still surface was distorted, twisted, as if the thing inside me was staring back. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed a rock, sharp enough to cut, and slashed across the markings on my chest, trying to break the curse. Blood dripped into the water, staining the surface, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder. Insistent. More insistent. As if the forest itself was angry. Knees clutching my chest, feeling the burn of the cut mixing with the spiral. I could hear them now, the marked ones. The spirits of those who had come before me, trapped in the same cycle, marked by the same curse. They were waiting for me to join them. I don't remember how I got back to the RV. The next thing I knew, I was driving, the road stretching out in front of me, the forest blurring into the distance. The whispers were gone, but the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight in my chest. I thought I had escaped. I thought the ritual had worked, but when I glanced down at the dashboard, my blood ran cold. There, carved into the plastic, was a small, intricate spiral. I was still marked. And I knew the forest wasn't done with me yet. It had been 3 months since the divorce was finalized, and I was still trying to wrap my head around it. The life I had imagined, the woman I thought I would grow old with, it was all gone. That's why I decided to take the RV out to Mount Hood National Forest for a long weekend. I needed to get away from everything. No people, no reminders, just me and nature. My therapist said it would be good for me to clear my head, to reconnect with something that didn't remind me of failure. Honestly, I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try something. If I stayed home, I would have just drowned myself in the silence of my empty apartment. This trip, I told myself, would be different. I could handle the quiet out here. I arrived in the late afternoon, pulling the RV into a spot near Timothy Lake. It was a beautiful area. Tall Douglas firs surrounded the lake like silent sentinels, the water reflecting the sky like a mirror. There were no other campers nearby. Exactly what I wanted. Solitude. I parked, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp, with that faint scent of pine needles. Perfect. For a moment, I thought I could finally breathe again. After setting up a small campfire, I sat back in my foldable chair, staring at the fading light over the mountains. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Peace. That's what I needed. But as the sun dipped lower, the quiet became overwhelming. There was no wind now, no rustling, no animal sounds, just me. sitting in a bubble of silence. I checked my watch. 6 p.m. That's when I noticed it. It was too quiet. The forest around me, which should have been alive with the sounds of birds and insects, was dead silent. At first, I figured it was just a lull, but as the minutes dragged on, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears, the soft crunch of every movement I made in my chair. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe this was what true isolation felt like. No noise, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement between the trees. It was subtle, a shadow slipping between the trunks just far enough away that I couldn't get a good look. I froze, squinting into the woods. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that played tricks on my mind. I scanned the tree line, waiting for the shadow to return, but I saw nothing. The trees stood still, their branches unmoving in the dead air. Must be a deer, I muttered, forcing myself to relax. The wind picked up briefly, rustling the leaves. I sighed, relieved to hear some kind of noise again. I grabbed a few more logs and threw them onto the fire. The crackling wood was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I told myself I was just on edge, being out here alone with too much time to think. After eating a quick meal, I decided to call it an early night. The silence was getting under my skin. So I climbed into the RV, locked the door behind me, and settled into the small bed in the back. My phone had no signal, of course, but I wasn't planning on talking to anyone anyway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to let my mind go blank. But the silence didn't let me rest. The RV was soundproofed, but even then, I felt like something was missing. No crickets, no owls, nothing, just the absence of sound. I felt trapped inside my own head. Every little shift of the mattress, every rustle of my blanket, amplified in the quiet. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. I wasn't sure why at first. There hadn't been any loud noises, no nightmares, just silence. But something was wrong. My skin prickled with unease. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced around the RV. The windows were fogged up. The air felt heavier, somehow oppressive. I heard something outside. No, that wasn't right. I heard nothing outside. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, listening closely. It was the strangest sensation, like my own breathing was distant, muffled, as though I wasn't entirely in my own body. I moved toward the window, wiping away some of the condensation with my sleeve, peering into the blackness beyond the RV. For a long time I saw nothing, just trees and shadows. And then, movement. This time I was sure. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the moonlight. Tall, unnaturally still, like it was waiting for something. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to see more clearly. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. Hello? I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't respond. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, mind racing. Was it another camper? Some kind of ranger? No. There was no way anyone would be out here this late, not without a sound. I checked the door. Still locked. But I felt exposed, vulnerable, knowing that whatever was out there was watching me. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it out the window, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The figure was gone, just like that, vanished, as if it had never been there. The next morning, the forest was still eerily quiet. No birds, no animals, just the constant, oppressive silence. I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it clung to me like a wet blanket. I told myself I was just paranoid, that the solitude was messing with my head, but something about the way the air felt today, something was off. I decided to take a short hike to clear my mind, hoping that getting out of the RV would make me feel better. But as I ventured down the trail, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something behind me. But the trail was empty. That's when I saw it again, a figure, this time in the distance, standing between the trees just off the trail. It was the same one from last night. Tall, gaunt, still. My heart hammered in my chest as I squinted, trying to make out more details. But before I could move, it slipped behind the trees and disappeared. I ran toward the spot where I'd seen it, my boots pounding against the damp earth. When I reached the trees, nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show that anyone had been there at all. I stood there, catching my breath, feeling the silence pressing down on me like a vice. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was completely still. Even my footsteps had stopped making noise. I stomped my boot on the ground, but I heard nothing, not even the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Panic surged through me. I clapped my hands together. Nothing. No sound. My breathing was shallow, frantic, but it was like I was listening to it from far away. The world had gone completely, impossibly silent. And then I saw them. Not just one figure, but several, moving between the trees, their bodies blending with the shadows. They were everywhere, circling me in complete silence. My heart raced, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. My legs felt heavy, every step muted, like I was running underwater. The forest shifted around me, the trail disappearing into the thick fog that had rolled in, disorienting me further. Somehow I made it back to the RV. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but still no sound. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was useless. The screen flickered, the GPS spinning in circles. I was trapped. For the next few hours, I stayed inside the RV, pacing back and forth, trying to calm myself down, but the silence never lifted. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts anymore, just the crushing weight of nothingness. And then, as the light began to fade, I saw them again, the silent ones. They were standing in a circle around the RV, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. No features, no mouths, just smooth skin where their faces should have been. They stood perfectly still, watching me through the windows, their bodies unnervingly thin and elongated. I banged on the window, screaming, but of course, no sound came. They didn't flinch, didn't move. They just stared, waiting. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave. But the RV wouldn't start. Every time I tried, the engine sputtered and died, as if something was draining the life out of it. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping outside. The silent ones didn't move, didn't react. But as I walked toward them, the air grew colder, the silence even more oppressive. My footsteps made no sound. My breathing was barely there. I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around, expecting to see one of them behind me, but there was nothing. Just the fog swirling around me and the figures waiting in the distance. In that moment, I realized what they wanted. They weren't going to kill me. No, that would be too simple. They wanted me to join them, to become one of them. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a part of them, and it was seeping into me, stealing my voice, my thoughts, my very sense of self. And if I stayed here much longer, I knew I would lose everything. I don't remember how I made it out. The next thing I knew, I was driving far away from the campsite, from the silent ones. The sound of the engine, the tires on the road, it was all faint, like I was still caught in their grip. But at least there was something, a reminder that I hadn't completely disappeared into that silence. It's been weeks since I got back, but I can still feel it. The quiet follows me, lingers in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I know that one day they'll come for me again. This time, I won't be able to run. The forest around me was too quiet. I had been sitting by the campfire outside my RV for hours, soaking in the silence, but something felt off now. The kind of wrongness that settles in your gut before your brain catches up. No wind, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. It had been like this since I arrived at the campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life, birds, insects, anything, but the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the faint hum of the old ham radio I had brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the awkward conversations became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think or maybe stop thinking altogether. At first it helped. The silence was comforting, but now it felt unnatural. A burst of static from the radio shattered the stillness, making me jump. I turned toward the RV where the old device sat inside. I hadn't touched it in hours. The signal had been dead all day. No stations, no voices, nothing. Until now. I stood, walked over, and ducked inside to check. The static had grown louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. Twisting the dials did nothing but shift the pitch of the noise. Then, beneath the crackling, I heard it. A faint, garbled voice speaking numbers. 13789. The sequence repeated, cold and mechanical, like an old number station transmission. My stomach twisted. There was no reason for a signal to reach this deep into the woods. No towers, no broadcasts, just miles of trees. The voice paused, then started again. 137. A chill crawled down my spine. I told myself it was just a rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere, maybe a military frequency, but something about the repetition felt deliberate. It wasn't just any message. It was meant for me. I shut off the radio, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not cryptic transmissions rattling in my head. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I spent hours hiking beneath towering pines, the cool, damp air filling my lungs. The forest should have been alive with the sounds of birds and rustling undergrowth, but the silence stretched on, unnatural and absolute. When I returned to the campsite, the static greeted me before I even reached the RV. The radio was on again. I hadn't touched it. My stomach nodded as I stepped inside. The static was different this time, louder, more intense, almost alive. I could feel it vibrating in my bones, thrumming through the floor. And beneath it, the numbers returned. 1378. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, silencing the radio instantly. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. A glitch, maybe. A stray electrical signal, a malfunction in the wiring. I'd worked with enough technology to know strange things happen sometimes. But the numbers, their clarity, their precision, felt deliberate. I shook off the unease and stepped outside, breathing in the cold night air. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the edge of my campsite, motionless. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weather jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but something about the way he stood, rigid, tense, set me on edge. "Hey!" I called out, keeping my voice steady. "You lost?" The man's eyes locked onto mine, his face tight with unease. "I heard it too," he said. A chill ran down my spine. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers." He glanced toward my RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" He nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I started getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My phone battery drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard. "What do you think it is?" Ben's gaze flicked toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I wanted to dismiss it, to call it coincidence, a technical anomaly. But the fear in Ben's voice made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the warmth of the fire, the silence of the woods. But the static was louder, more insistent. The numbers were clearer now, pressing into the night. 1378. Ben sat across from me, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes never stopped scanning the darkness. He hadn't relaxed since he arrived, and I understood why. Something was wrong. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to break the silence than anything else. Ben didn't look at me. He just shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" Ben hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "A warning from what?" Before he could answer, the static on the radio cut out. Silence pressed down on us, thick and unnatural, making my skin prickle with unease. Then, a sound, a soft rhythmic clicking, like metal tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees, but the beam revealed nothing beyond endless darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. And then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, barely able to hear my own voice over the pounding of my heart. The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I shot to my feet, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The clicking was everywhere now, shifting through the trees, closing in. The air felt charged, thick and heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once I agreed. The next morning, Ben was gone. His tent stood empty, his gear scattered across the clearing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static curling through the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they disappeared into the underbrush, as if he had walked into the trees and vanished. My phone's GPS spun uselessly, leading me in circles. The battery drained faster than I had ever seen. And the static, it was louder now, pressing against my skull, vibrating inside my head. The numbers were back, repeating over and over, carving themselves into my mind. 137. By midday, I stumbled upon something unexpected, an old, crumbling radio tower hidden deep in the woods. Rusted metal, vines creeping up its sides. Yet despite its decay, it still hummed with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the silence, my heart hammering in my chest. At the top, I found it, the source of the signal. A small device, pulsing with a cold, unnatural light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out, hesitating for only a second before my fingers brushed against its surface. The static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, it all crashed into me at once, an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. Below, the forest came alive. Flickering lights moved between the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew frantic, surrounding me, chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV, only that the lights followed. The clicking never far behind. But somehow, I got inside, slammed the door shut, and turned the key with shaking hands. The engine roared to life. The device was still clutched in my grip. As I drove, the static faded, but the numbers remained, whispering in the back of my mind. 137. It's been days now. I can't get them out of my head. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, it knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet.